There comes a point when many men look at life and feel its crushing weight. They wake up each morning with a knot in their chest, convinced that every decision, every mistake, every failure is proof that they are falling behind in a race they never asked to run. The world tells them to take things seriously. Career, reputation, responsibilities, even their inner fears. As if all of life were a battlefield where one wrong step means ruin. But what if this is the greatest illusion of all? What if the pain comes not from life itself, but from believing it must always be heavy, urgent, and grave? The truth, hidden beneath layers of conditioning, is that life is not a courtroom where you stand on trial, but a stage where you are free to dance, stumble, laugh, and play. This deeper perspective does not dismiss your struggles. It transforms them. The very moments you once called failures may in fact be moves in a game whose purpose is not winning, but playing. The seriousness you carry is not strength. It is a burden that keeps you from breathing, from seeing clearly, from being alive. And if you can dare to question this, if you can open yourself to the possibility that life is less of a prison and more of a game, then something shifts inside you. The tension begins to soften, and what once felt unbearable becomes strangely light. So stay with me, because we will unfold this paradox together. How letting go of the seriousness can bring you the clarity and freedom you've always longed for. And before we go further, I invite you to subscribe, share, and leave a comment below. By doing so, you're not just helping this channel, you're helping carry this reflection to other men who may also be suffocating under the weight of life's supposed seriousness. Men who need to remember that they too are allowed to play. From the time we are children, we are trained to treat life as a serious competition. We are told to get good grades, to behave properly, to grow into responsible adults who make no mistakes. Every stumble is punished, every imperfection is corrected. And slowly we begin to believe that existence itself is a test. By the time a man reaches adulthood, he carries this conditioning like armor, constantly evaluating his worth through achievements, fearing judgment if he falls short, and treating every experience as if the world were watching with critical eyes. Yet deep down, he feels the exhaustion of this seriousness. He notices that the harder he clings to control, the further joy slips away. What was meant to be a dance becomes a march, rigid and joyless, where even success feels hollow because it is never enough. But when you pause and look closely, you begin to see the cracks in this illusion. Nature itself does not move with such grim determination. Trees do not strive to prove themselves, they grow. Birds do not sing to impress, they sing because song is their nature. The universe is not a courtroom demanding constant seriousness. It is a flow of endless movement, unfolding without judgment. Life, then, is more like a game, a play of experiences, an improvisation where mistakes are not disasters but part of the rhythm. To see this is to realize that all the heaviness we carry comes not from reality itself, but from the way we've been taught to interpret it. The game was always happening, yet we mistook it for a battle, and so we armored ourselves against joy. When a man begins to awaken to this truth, something remarkable happens. The pressure starts to loosen. The fear of failing, of being ridiculed, of not meeting impossible standards begins to fade, because he sees that life was never about winning or losing. It was about playing. He may still work, still strive, still take part in the responsibilities of living, but his inner posture changes. He no longer treats every setback as proof of inadequacy. Instead, he sees it as part of the game's unfolding, a move that may look like loss but often opens new paths. To those around him, this shift may look strange. They may think he has stopped caring, that he has grown careless or aloof. But the reality is the opposite. He has started living more deeply, more honestly, more freely than ever before. When a man first realizes that life is not as serious as he once believed, the change does not come gently. It feels like the ground beneath him begins to tremble, because for decades he has built his identity around the seriousness of everything. He has been the man who works tirelessly, who measures his value by his productivity, who sacrifices joy for the sake of appearances. To question the seriousness of life feels dangerous, almost irresponsible, as though letting go will cause everything to collapse. And yet, if he looks honestly, he notices that the collapse he fears has already been happening. The weight of seriousness has stolen his laughter, dimmed his curiosity, and made his days feel heavy even in moments of supposed success. The truth is that by treating life as a constant test, he has lost the very spirit that makes it worth living. It is here that the contrast becomes clear. Before, he believed seriousness was strength, that being always disciplined, cautious, and controlled would keep him safe. After awakening, he begins to see that seriousness was often just fear in disguise. It was the fear of being judged, the fear of failing, the fear of not being enough. And fear, when carried too long, hardens into armor. This armor may protect him from humiliation, but it also keeps out joy, spontaneity, and intimacy. Life in armor is safe, but it is suffocating. When he finally allows himself to loosen it, to see life as a game rather than a trial, he does not become weaker. He becomes lighter, more present, and strangely more powerful. Others may not understand this change. They may accuse him of being reckless or immature, because he no longer treats every moment as a battlefield. They may say he seems detached, as though he no longer cares about outcomes. But what they cannot see is the depth of his new clarity. He still works, but he no longer works as a slave to fear. He still loves, but his love is no longer chained to insecurity. He still faces challenges, but he does not tremble before them, because he knows that losing one round in the game does not mean losing everything. In fact, he realizes that the very idea of losing is an illusion, for even what appears as failure becomes a piece of the larger play. This realization makes him calmer, more grounded, and paradoxically more effective, because he is no longer paralyzed by the weight of imagined consequences. To live this way is not to deny the difficulties of existence, but to embrace them differently. Pain, loss, disappointment, they are still part of life, but they are no longer signs of failure. They are movements in the dance, notes in the song, turns in the game. By seeing life this way, he steps out of the prison of seriousness and enters the freedom of play. And it is here, in this freedom, that he begins to discover what it means not just to survive, but to live. Imagine a man who has spent years building his life like a tower of cards, each piece carefully placed, trembling under the weight of perfection. His career, his reputation, his relationships, all of it balanced on the belief that one wrong move would cause it all to collapse. He moves cautiously, seriously, with little room for laughter or play. To him, life is fragile and dangerous, a structure that must be protected at all costs. And yet, when he looks closely, he notices that no matter how careful he has been, the wind has always blown. Jobs change, people leave, health falters, time slips away. The tower he tried so hard to protect was never meant to stand forever. This is the great irony of taking life too seriously. No amount of control prevents its shifting nature. The more rigidly you try to hold it, the more quickly it slips from your grasp. This realization is not meant to plunge him into despair, but to liberate him. Once he sees that life is not a tower but a river, everything changes. A river does not ask to be controlled. It asks to be entered, to be moved with, to be experienced. Seriousness demands control, but playfulness allows flow. The man who clings to seriousness tries to build walls against the current, exhausting himself in the process. The man who sees life as a game learns to step into the river, to let its movements carry him, to swim, stumble, and float as the water shifts. And in doing so, he discovers a kind of power that no rigid seriousness could ever give him. The power of adaptability, of presence, of being alive in the moment rather than trapped in the illusion of control. Of course, from the outside, this man now looks different. To those who are still trapped in the old seriousness, he may appear reckless, as if he has stopped caring about outcomes. They see him smiling in situations where others panic, laughing in the face of uncertainty, walking away from arguments that most would fight to win. They mistake his lightness for weakness, but in truth, he has found a strength they cannot yet recognize. For seriousness, despite its heavy mask, is often fragile. It cracks under failure, shatters under rejection, and trembles at the unknown. But the man who sees life as a game cannot be broken so easily, because he knows the rules were never as strict as he once believed. He can fall and rise again, lose and keep playing, because he no longer fears the illusion of defeat. This shift does not remove responsibility or dull his depth. On the contrary, it deepens it. For when he no longer carries the unbearable weight of treating every moment as life or death, he can finally show up more fully. His work becomes more creative, his relationships more genuine, his presence more relaxed. He is not drained by the fear of failure but energized by the joy of playing. In his laughter, in his calm, in his quiet defiance of life's heaviness, others begin to sense something they did not expect, that perhaps they too are allowed to put down the burden, to loosen the grip, to live as if life were less a prison and more a dance. The more deeply a man embraces this shift, the more he notices how much of his past was spent chasing illusions. He remembers the endless nights worrying about outcomes that never mattered, the hours sacrificed to arguments that led nowhere, the energy wasted on trying to appear flawless in a world that was never keeping score. The seriousness he carried was like a fog, convincing him that his worth depended on winning battles that were, in truth, only shadows. When the fog begins to lift, he realizes how much life he missed by being so consumed with appearances and control. The laughter he once suppressed, the moments of silliness he avoided, the risks he refused to take. All of these could have been part of the game, but he traded them for a seriousness that left him weary and unfulfilled. At first, this realization can bring grief. He may look back and mourn the years lost to the illusion of seriousness, the times when he could have been lighter, freer, more alive. But if he lingers too long in regret, he risks turning seriousness into yet another disguise. So instead of dwelling on the past, he learns to take the lesson into the present. He cannot recover the years, but he can transform the ones ahead. And this transformation begins not with grand gestures, but with the smallest of choices. Smiling at what once angered him, stepping back from what once consumed him, daring to play even when the world tells him to be solemn. These little rebellions against seriousness slowly reshape his entire life. From the outside, his shift may unsettle others. Colleagues may wonder why he no longer seems so obsessed with climbing ladders. Friends may notice that he no longer engages in endless debates or petty competitions. Even family may feel confused by his calm when crises arise. To them, his refusal to panic or strive with the same intensity may look like indifference. But in reality, he has never cared more deeply. The difference is that his care is no longer poisoned by fear. He shows up not because he must prove himself, but because he wants to participate in the play of life. His seriousness has given way to sincerity, and sincerity is far more powerful, because it allows him to be present without the mask. This presence begins to ripple outward. Those around him feel lighter in his company, as if his very being grants them permission to exhale. They may not fully understand why, but they sense that he is no longer trapped by the invisible chains that bind so many. His laughter no longer sounds forced, but free. His silence no longer feels heavy, but grounding. And his presence no longer seeks to impress, but simply to be. In this way, the man who once drowned in seriousness becomes a mirror to others, showing them that they too can let go. And though they may resist at first, some will find in him the courage to step into the same freedom, to stop treating life as a grim trial, and to rediscover it as the game it was always meant to be. As this way of being deepens, the man begins to notice how much more resilient he has become. The setbacks that once shook him to his core now pass through him with less weight, because he no longer interprets them as signs of personal failure. Losing a job, facing rejection, making mistakes. These are no longer catastrophes but simply moves in the larger game. He understands that even the hardest moments carry a strange kind of play, where they force him to adapt, to improvise, to find new ways of being. Instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" he begins to ask, "How can I play with what has been given?" This shift does not erase pain, but it transforms it into movement rather than paralysis. Life still demands effort, But effort now comes with fluidity, not fear. And with this fluidity comes an inner calm that surprises even him. Where he once tightened under the weight of anxiety, he now feels a looseness, a readiness to flow with what arrives. This calm is not apathy. It is the strength that comes from no longer being enslaved by seriousness. In conversations, he listens more openly because he is not defending an image of himself. In relationships, he loves more freely because he is not bargaining for security. In his solitude, he rests without shame, because he no longer believes every moment must be justified with productivity. To those who still carry the burden of seriousness, this peace may look like laziness or detachment, but in truth, it is the opposite. It is engagement without chains, commitment without fear, life lived with depth rather than weight. The consequences of this transformation reach into every corner of his being. His body feels lighter because tension no longer dominates his movements. His mind feels clearer because it is not clouded by endless worries about appearances. His spirit feels freer because he recognizes that the meaning of life was never hidden in achievement, but in participation. He understands now that to play is not to be careless, but to care differently, not with fear of loss, but with joy in the act itself. The seriousness he once carried told him that every mistake was fatal. The clarity he now holds shows him that every mistake is part of the rhythm. And as he lives this truth more fully, he realizes that the game of life does not ask him to win, but simply to keep playing with honesty, curiosity, and presence. From this place, he no longer fears the judgments of others. He sees clearly that most people who mock or criticize are themselves trapped in seriousness, unable to laugh at their own illusions. And while their voices may still echo, they no longer have power over him. His center is no longer outside in approval but inside, rooted in the awareness that life itself is a game, and that the only true loss is forgetting to play. This awareness does not make him reckless but steady, not careless but compassionate, because when he sees life as play, he finally sees himself and others as companions rather than competitors. In that recognition, seriousness dissolves into freedom, and what remains is the unshakable joy of being alive. At last, the paradox comes into view. The man who once thought that taking life seriously was the mark of maturity discovers that it was the very thing suffocating him. What seemed like discipline was often just fear disguised in responsibility. What looked like strength was only armor against judgment, and what felt like control was, in truth, a fragile illusion, always at risk of collapse. Yet the moment he allows himself to see life as a game, everything he once feared transforms. Isolation becomes clarity, because in stepping away from seriousness, he finally sees the world for what it is. Weakness becomes power, because in admitting his vulnerability, he becomes resilient, unshaken by the illusions of winning and losing. And loss becomes liberation, because in letting go of what he cannot control, he gains the freedom to live fully. This realization does not mean he escapes suffering or avoids responsibility. Life will still bring its share of hardships, demands, and endings, but now he meets them with a different spirit. Where once he stiffened and resisted, now he moves with the current. Where once he trembled at failure, now he sees it as part of the play. And where once he lived as though the world were a judge, now he lives as though the world were a playground. He has not abandoned seriousness altogether. He can still act with commitment, with depth, with sincerity, but he no longer confuses seriousness with truth. Truth is lighter, freer, more playful than he ever imagined, and it gives him the strength to walk with grace through whatever comes. So if you too have felt the heaviness of life pressing on your chest, remember this: the trouble is not life itself, but the belief that it must always be serious. If you can loosen your grip, if you can dare to play, you may discover that the freedom you've been searching for has been here all along. And if these words have stirred something within you, I invite you to subscribe to this channel for more reflections like this, to share this video with someone who might need to put down the weight of seriousness, and to add your voice in the comments. Every thought, every story, every reflection you share helps build a community where men, and anyone who listens, can remember that life, in the end, is not a prison to endure, but a game to play.